I learned to recognize an ambush by the way people stop meeting your eyes. What I never expected was that one day, the ambush would be waiting in my own living room, and that the man who set it would be the man who once swore he would wait for me to come home. My name is Elena Reyes. I am 34 years old, and for 8 months I had been stationed overseas as an intelligence analyst, reading patterns in other people's lives for a living. I flew home on a Monday. The tarmac smelled like rain and jet fuel, and all I wanted was a quiet evening in my own kitchen. I did not go straight to the house. I drove 40 minutes in the opposite direction, to my mother's little blue bungalow, where my daughter had been living while I was gone. Sophia was 13 months old. She had learned to walk without me. When my mother opened the door, Sophia looked at me the way children look at a face they know from photographs, and for 3 long seconds she did not come to me. Then she did. She pressed her whole small weight into my collarbone and grabbed a fistful of my uniform. And I stood in that doorway and let my mother hold us both. My phone buzzed on the drive back. It was Marcus. "Don't be late tonight. Mom has a surprise waiting for you." I read it at a red light and smiled. That is the part I would replay for months afterward. That I smiled. The porch light was on. Through the front window, I could see more silhouettes than there should have been. And I told myself it was a welcome home party, because that is what a person wants to believe after 8 months away. I unlocked my own front door with my own key, my daughter asleep against my shoulder, and stepped into a room that had been arranged like a stage. 14 people, aunts, uncles, cousins I had spent 6 Thanksgivings trying to win over, all seated and silent, looking at me the way a jury looks at a defendant. Nobody stood up. Nobody said, "Welcome home." My husband was standing by the fireplace in a pressed shirt, groomed like a man expecting cameras. His mother, Vivian, sat in the center of my sofa with her hands folded, wearing pearls to a Monday evening in her son's house. 2 things reached me before any of them spoke, and I want to be honest that I did not understand either one at the time. The first was a smell, faint, sharp, chemical, drifting from the direction of the kitchen there and then gone, the way a scent is when a window has been opened to clear it. The second was smaller, the narrow cabinet beside the stove, the one that has always sat flush against the wall, had been pulled out and pushed back at an angle, half an inch off. My brain filed both details away without comment, the way it files a license plate, and moved on. Then Marcus threw a sheet of paper onto the coffee table. "I had it done last week," he said, loud enough for the back of the room. "It's a DNA test. Sophia isn't mine." A sound moved through the sofas. Not a gasp exactly, something softer and uglier. The sound of people performing a surprise they had already rehearsed. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that and honest about what it cost. Inside me, something broke without making any noise at all. I simply did not give it permission to reach my face. Vivian rose. She pointed one manicured finger past me, at my own front door. "Get out of my house," she said. Her house. I had signed the mortgage in that kitchen. Behind me, the door opened again, and a young woman I had met twice at a company holiday party came in dragging 2 suitcases. I recognized the luggage before I recognized her. It was mine packed, zipped, wheeled in on cue by a girl named Chloe who could not look at me while she did it. That was when I understood that this was not a discovery. It was a production. Somebody had packed my clothes before I landed. I picked up the paper. It took less than 4 seconds. The header font was wrong, not the format any accredited laboratory in this country uses. The specimen line had no chain of custody number, and no lab that has ever survived an audit releases a paternity result without one. Whatever this was, it had not come from a hospital, it had come from a printer. I could have said so. Every eye in that room was waiting for me to scream, to beg, to prove I was the unstable woman they had already been told about. So I said nothing. I set the paper back down on the table, exactly where he had thrown it. I adjusted my sleeping daughter's weight against my shoulder. I looked once around the room at 14 faces, at my husband's steady hands, at the half-inch gap beside the stove, and I walked out. Nobody followed me. I buckled Sophia into her car seat under a sky the color of wet slate, and my hands were completely steady, and I hated them a little for it. Marcus believed he had just put me out on the street. He did not know that 8 months earlier, before I shipped out, I had left a few eyes behind in that house. The extended stay hotel off the interstate had a laminate counter and a window that looked out over a parking lot. I paid for 6 nights and asked for the room farthest from the stairwell. Some habits do not switch off just because you have landed. Sophia went down at 9:40. It took her a long time. She kept sitting up in the borrowed travel crib to check that I was still there. And each time I said, "I'm here, baby," until she stopped checking. Then the room was quiet, and I sat down on the floor with my back against the bed to make her bottle for the morning. That was when my hands started shaking. Not a tremor, a real, visible shake, so bad that I spilled formula powder across the carpet and had to press both palms flat against my knees until it passed. I want to be honest about this, because people would later tell me how strong I was, and I never knew how to answer them. Discipline is not something I was born with. It is something I choose to put on every morning. The way I put on the uniform. Underneath it, I am a 34-year-old woman who had just been thrown out of her own house by 14 people who watched it happen, and who was now sitting on a hotel floor at midnight, spilling powdered milk, trying not to make noise because her daughter was asleep 4 feet away. I let myself have 11 minutes. Then I got up, wiped the carpet with a hand towel, made the bottle, and started working the problem. The first thing I checked was money. Our joint checking account had a balance of $11.62. 8 months of my deployment pay had gone into it, and it was gone. The joint savings had been closed entirely on Thursday, 4 days before I landed. Both cards carrying both our names had been maxed, then frozen by the issuer for suspected fraud, which was almost funny. What he could not touch was the account in my name alone. Opened at 22, never joined to his. It held enough to matter. And in the lining of my go bag, where it had lived through 3 assignments, was a prepaid emergency card I had never once used. That is what I bought the formula with, at a 24-hour pharmacy at 1 in the morning. My daughter asleep in her car seat, my uniform still on. Marcus wanted me hungry. He wanted me calling him by Wednesday to ask for grocery money, because a woman who has to ask is a woman who can be managed. I have been trained by people who taught me how to go 72 hours in a place that wanted me dead. $11.62 was not a defeat. It was an inconvenience with a very specific shape, and the shape told me something he needed me broke fast. Men who are patient do not empty an account 4 days early. The call came at 7 the next morning. My commander did not open with pleasantries, which is how I knew it was bad. The base legal office had received a formal complaint from my spouse. Marcus had submitted a sworn statement alleging adultery during my deployment, attached to a document he described as a paternity test, along with a timeline he had constructed of dates I was supposedly unaccounted for. Nobody was arresting me. No tribunal was being convened by lunchtime. What there was, my commander explained carefully, was worse in the way that slow things are worse a preliminary inquiry, a file with my name on it. And because a complaint alleging personal misconduct and deception goes straight to the question of judgment and reliability, it would be reported into the adjudication process for my security clearance. I did analysis. Everything I did required that clearance. Without it, I was not a major with 14 years in. I was an unemployable civilian with a sealed resume. I thanked him, told him the allegations were false, and said I would submit a response through counsel. My voice did not move. When I hung up, I sat on the edge of that hotel bed for a long moment and understood something that changed the entire shape of the next 3 months. The affair accusation was not the attack. It was the smoke. Marcus did not need anyone to believe I had cheated. He needed me to spend every waking hour proving I had not writing statements, gathering flight manifests, defending my own name to a review board so that I would never once turn around and look at him. You do not build a distraction that expensive unless there is something behind it worth that much. And underneath all of it, something older was surfacing. 6 years of Thanksgivings where Vivian introduced me as Marcus's wife. She's in the service. 6 years seated at the end of the table. They had treated me the way you treat something disposable useful for a season. Set out with the trash when the season ends. They forgot that the people you throw away are the ones who keep every receipt and every wound. At 8:40, someone knocked on my door. It was not Marcus. It was not the police. The man in my hallway was holding a manila envelope, and every instinct I had told me it was divorce paperwork. His name was Andre Whitfield. He was married to Marcus's younger sister, Nadia, and in 6 years I had never once heard Vivian say his name without a small pause in front of it, as though she were deciding whether it was worth the effort. At family dinners, he sat where I sat at the end of the table, near the kitchen door, in the seat you give to people you have not decided to fully invite. He was a forensic accountant. Vivian called it bookkeeping. Marcus once introduced him to a room of investors as my sister's husband. He does numbers. So when I opened the door and saw the envelope, I did the math the way everyone in that family would have. They had sent the errand boy. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. "You can leave them on the counter." Andre looked past me, not at me, past me to the travel crib in the corner where Sophia was sleeping. Something in his face changed shape. Then he stepped inside, and I closed the door. And he set the envelope down on the little laminate table without any ceremony at all. "They're not divorce papers," he said, "and I'm not here as a favor to you." I have spent my career learning to hear the sentence under the sentence. That one had weight on the second half. "Then why are you here?" He pulled out a chair, sat down heavily, and put both hands flat on the table like a man steadying himself on a boat. "Because 11 months ago, your husband asked me to sign 3 routine transfer authorizations for a family trust account," he said. "I signed them. I was doing him a favor, and I was doing it fast, because Nadia had been crying about him being under stress." He looked up. "I pulled those documents last week. 2 of them were not what he told me they were. My signature is on money that moved somewhere. It should not have moved." The room got very quiet. "If Marcus goes down clean," Andre said, "he goes down alone. If Marcus runs, then the only signature anyone can find in this country is mine. I am a black forensic accountant with my name on paper in a fraud file. I do not need to explain to you how that ends for me." And there it was, not nobility, not a rescue, a man standing in a hotel room at 8:40 in the morning because he had a family, a license, a reputation he had built brick by brick, and a wife whose mother had spent 5 years making him feel like an accessory. I trusted him more for it. People who help you for nothing can stop at any time. People who are standing on the same trapdoor do not. "Show me," I said. He opened the envelope. What came out was a ledger printed, tabbed, color-coded, the work of a man who had clearly not slept. He turned it toward me and began at the top, and within 4 minutes, the shape of my marriage rearranged itself in front of me. Marcus was not a successful investment broker having a difficult year. Marcus was carrying roughly $4 million in margin debt against positions that had been bleeding since the previous spring. He had been covering calls by moving money that was not his, in amounts small enough to look like housekeeping and frequent enough to be desperate. And in March, 4 months into my deployment, he had remortgaged our house. I remember the exact feeling, not rage, a kind of cold clarity, like a lens turning. I had signed that mortgage in that kitchen at 28 years old. He had put it back on the block while I was 8,000 miles away doing threat assessments, and he had needed me gone from that house before I ever opened the mail. "He didn't throw you out because he thinks you cheated," Andre said. "He threw you out because you were about to see the paperwork." The affair story was not jealousy. It was accounting. Then Andre turned the page and tapped a column he had highlighted in a different color from everything else not red, like the losses, yellow. "These are the ones that bothered me," he said. They were not panicked transfers. They were the opposite small, clean, identical. On the 15th of the month, going back years, routed through 2 shell companies before landing at a private medical group, a men's health institute, $60,000 a year, moved like a man hiding an affair. Except no affair costs that consistently for that long. "He has executive health coverage," I said slowly. "Why would he pay a clinic out of shell accounts?" "You only hide a medical payment," Andre said. "If the diagnosis is the thing you're afraid of." We sat with that, and then, because the room had gone somewhere honest, he told me about a restaurant, Nadia's birthday, 4 years ago. He had reached for the check, and Vivian had touched the waiter's sleeve and asked him pleasantly, in front of everyone, to run the card twice, just to be sure it goes through. "I laughed," Andre said. "I laughed, Elena. That's the part I still can't get out of my mouth." I told him about 6 years of end-of-the-table seats, about being introduced as Marcus's wife. She's in the service, 2 people the same family had decided were disposable, sitting in a hotel room with the receipts. Then Andre turned to the next page and stopped moving. "Elena," he said, "there's something bigger than the money." The page was a diagnostic summary from the Men's Health Institute. Dated 16 years ago, Marcus would have been 20. The language was dense, and I made myself read all of it before I let myself understand any of it. An untreated infection, severe bilateral damage, and then the conclusion. In the flat font medicine uses for things that change your life. Azoospermia. No viable sperm, irreversible. Marcus had been sterile since before I met him. "He's paid them for a decade to keep that file sealed," Andre said quietly. "VIP records agreement. His name never enters a database anyone can subpoena." I did not gasp, or cry, or say that's impossible. I sat very still, because a door had opened in my mind and I could see down the hallway behind it, and I did not want to walk down it yet, because here is what nobody outside that room understood. I had not used a donor. 2 months before I deployed, we did IVF. Marcus pushed for it, actually said he wanted to be a father before he turned 36. He drove me to every appointment, and held my coat while I cried in the parking garage after the second round of injections. On the morning of retrieval, he went into the collection room like every other man there, came out, and squeezed my hand. 6 days later, a nurse called we had a viable embryo. I had carried Sophia. I had gone into labor at 4 in the morning in a hospital 11 miles from my mother's house. I knew, without needing a document, that I was her mother. I had never touched another man, not a claim I needed to defend, simply a fact of my biography. But if Marcus had never produced a single living sperm cell, his sample was nothing, dead fluid. Any embryology lab in the country would have called that same afternoon to say the cycle had failed on male factor. Instead, they called and said, "Congratulations." I looked at the travel crib, at the small rising and falling shape under the blanket, and the hallway in my mind went all the way to the end. If he cannot father a child, then who is the child I am rocking to sleep? I did not sleep that night. I did something better. I did not touch a military database. Our DNA is on file for one purpose. Identifying remains and using it for paternity is a crime I had no intention of committing to prove I was not a criminal. I did it the slow, legally unimpeachable way. Marcus's electric razor was still in the guest bathroom drawer of the house I legally co-owned. My attorney sent a licensed collector with me, chain of custody documented at every step, and we took 2 more reference items, and I asked Nadia. That was the hardest phone call of my life, and she said yes before I finished the sentence. She did not know what she was agreeing to. She thought she was helping her brother prove a point. The results came back Thursday. The maternity finding was absolute. I was Sophia's biological mother. I had known that, and still, reading it on paper, something in my chest unlocked that I had not admitted was locked. Then, the second line, Marcus shared 25% of his DNA with my daughter. Not 0. 0 would have meant an anonymous donor, a clean, ordinary, disappointing explanation. 25% is not fatherhood. 25% is what you share with a nephew, genetically. My husband was Sophia's uncle. Marcus had one sister, Nadia, and he had one brother, Julian Hale, the oldest, the brilliant one, in a silver frame on Vivian's piano. He died 3 years earlier when his car went off a wet highway 2 full years before my daughter was conceived. And before he died, Julian had banked samples at a fertility center, the same one we used. It took Andre 4 days to find the rest, and it was uglier than I had let myself imagine. $150,000 had left a Hale family account in sequential cash withdrawals the week of my retrieval. The clinic's medical director had not simply looked the other way, he could not have. A real semen analysis would have shown a count of 0, so he falsified the analysis, altered the laboratory log, and handled the material himself rather than let a staff embryologist run the standard witness verification. And I remembered the morning Vivian arrived in a cream suit carrying coffees, which she had never once done in 6 years. She put a hand on my back and steered me toward the recovery lounge. "Let me handle the front desk. Sweetheart, you rest. You're serving our country." I thought she was finally letting me in. I sat on that hotel floor until 3 in the morning with the report in my lap, watching my daughter sleep. I want to say this clearly, because I know what people expect a woman to feel here. I did not look at her and feel horror. I looked at her and felt something enormous and fierce open up in me. She did nothing. She chose nothing. She was made out of a crime. But she is not a crime. She is a 13-month-old girl who sleeps with one fist against her cheek. And she is mine. I would not let anyone define her by what was done to me. That was the night it stopped being about revenge. But one thing still did not fit. If Sophia was their prize, why announce to 14 relatives that she was not his, then go to court demanding custody of her? The answer, it turned out, was in a dead man's will. Andre found it on the 5th day, buried in the estate filings of a man who had been dead for 11 years. Harold Hale. Marcus's grandfather, the one who built the money, had done what a certain kind of American family does when it fears dilution more than death. He left the bulk of his estate in a generation-skipping trust with a bloodline provision. The language was old-fashioned and perfectly clear. The principle would not vest in his children. It would vest in his lineal descendants by blood. Adopted and stepchildren were excluded by name. Each of Harold's 3 children held a share that matured only if that branch produced a blood grandchild before the trust's distribution date. Julian was dead and childless. Nadia and Andre had been trying for 4 years without success. Which left Marcus, and Marcus had known since he was 20 that his branch was already over. "Do you see it?" Andre said, his voice gone strange. "Look at the distribution date. It was 14 months away. I let the whole architecture assemble itself. And it was so simple I felt stupid for looking for anything more complicated. Sophia was not a daughter to them. Sophia was a qualifying event. She carried Julian's DNA, which meant she was a lineal blood descendant of Harold Hale. She was the key that opened somewhere between $30 and $40 million, the only key that would ever exist, because the man whose name was on her birth certificate could not make another. And that explained the thing that had made no sense to me since the moment he threw that paper on my coffee table. Marcus needed the world to believe Sophia was not his. So a jury of relatives would watch me thrown out of my own house without a single question. The fake test was not about the child. It was about me, about making me the woman who deserved what happened next. But he needed the child. He could not survive without her, so he would deny her in a living room on Monday and file for custody on Friday. And the two only looked contradictory if you believed he thought of her as a person. He did not. She was collateral with a heartbeat. That night, I did the thing I had been putting off. 8 months earlier, 2 days before I shipped out, I had noticed the first irregularities in our accounts and done what training made automatic. I secured the perimeter. Encrypted sensors, hardwired, in the common areas. On a private server, I never once looked at the feed while overseas. I did not want to be the woman who watched her husband from 8,000 miles away. I opened it at 11 at night on a hotel bed, with Andre sitting across from me, and I scrubbed backward to the early hours of the morning before I landed. They were in my living room. Marcus was pacing. Chloe stood near the fireplace, chewing the side of her thumb the way people do when the thing they agreed to has become real. I turned the audio up. "Marcus," her voice was thin. "The timing's too tight. Are you sure the gas leak's going to look like an accident when she gets back from the base?" I did not move. I could hear the air conditioner and my daughter breathing in her crib. And I remembered a smell near my kitchen. Faint, chemical, drifting and then gone, as if a window had been opened to clear it. I remembered the narrow cabinet beside the stove pulled out and pushed back half an inch off the wall. I had walked past it with my child on my shoulder and filed it away like a license plate. I was scheduled to land on Tuesday. My transport was rebooked at the last minute, and I came home Monday 24 hours early, through a front door in a house that was still being prepared for me. The ambush in that living room was not a plan. It was an improvisation. He had lost his window and had to get me out of that house immediately, before I noticed anything. and the only tool he could buy on short notice was $300 of forged paper. Andre found the rest in an hour. Not a military policy, the government pays a fraction of what people imagine. This was private, a term life policy Marcus took out on me 11 weeks before my return date. $3 million, himself as sole beneficiary, with a rider covering accidental death in the home. Andre stood up so fast his chair scraped. "We call the police. Right now, tonight. No. Elena." "Listen to me." I kept my voice level, because if I let it rise, I would not have gotten the sentence out. If we call tonight, they arrest Chloe, Marcus hires the best defense money can borrow, says the audio is out of context, says his subordinate was fantasizing, he is out in 96 hours. And then he walks into family court as a man who was falsely accused by his hysterical wife. And I lose her. Not the house, not the money. Her. Andre sat down slowly. "I don't want revenge," I told him. "I want my daughter safe. Sometimes those two things look identical, but they are never the same thing. Revenge is fast. Safe is airtight. So I chose the slower road. Subpoenas, federal regulators, a record no lawyer could talk his way out of, which meant I needed something I did not have. I needed someone inside that family. Redirected before the distribution date, and the girl would never notice. And if she ever did, she would be told it was to protect the family. Then she said the sentence, "Nadia has always been the easy one. She's not a daughter, Marcus. She's a savings account with feelings." I watched a woman find out what she was worth to her own mother, standing up at 9:15 in the morning beside a laminate table. Nadia did not scream. She hung up very carefully, set the phone face down, and sat on the end of the bed. Andre crossed the room and knelt in front of her, and she put both hands over her face and made a sound I have only heard twice in my life. She had lost her mother that morning, not to death, to arithmetic. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat. "What do you need?" And that is how it happened, not with a heist, not with anybody breaking into anything at midnight, but with 3 people at a hotel table who had all been told, one way or another, that they were the disposable part of the Hale family. They treated us as things to be thrown away. They forgot that the people you throw away are the ones who keep every receipt. Here is what we actually did. And I know it is less cinematic than what people imagine. Nadia was a named beneficiary of her grandfather's trust. That gave her the legal right to demand a full accounting from the trustee. Every statement, every transfer, every amendment bearing her signature. She sent the demand through her own attorney that afternoon. Andre held a current engagement letter for 2 Hale entities. So when the documents came back, he was not a snooping relative. He was the accountant of record. He built the file the way he would have built it for a court-sourced, indexed, no speculation. Every conclusion traceable to a document. Then he did the thing that made all of it real. He filed a whistleblower submission with the Securities and Exchange Commission and a parallel report with the Bureau. And he signed his own name to it, including the 2 transfer authorizations that carried his signature. He walked in the door already confessing the worst thing anyone could say about him. "If I hide it, it's evidence," he told me. "If I hand it over, it's a mistake." The SEC does not raid a house because a wife is upset. It issues subpoenas. Within 11 days, custodial banks, the brokerage's compliance officer, and 2 offshore correspondents had been served, and Marcus's own firm was legally forbidden from telling him. That is the part nobody puts in movies. It is slow, and it is quiet, and it is completely unstoppable. One more thing mattered, and I only understood how much later. We live in a one-party consent state. That means a recording of a conversation is lawful if one participant knows it is being made, and I was a participant. Every word on my home system, and everything that came after, was admissible. Marcus had spent his life in rooms where money made rules bend. He had never once considered that the rules he needed were about a microphone. 10 days later, Nadia forwarded me an invitation on heavy cream cardstock. Vivian was hosting her annual charity gala. Half of Marcus's investors would be there. I decided to go. I did not sneak into that ballroom. I walked through the front doors at 7:40 in my mess dress uniform and gave my name to the woman with the guest list. She found it, because Nadia had put it there. Something particular happens in a room like that when a woman in uniform walks in alone. Conversation does not stop, it thins. People look, then look at each other to learn what they are supposed to think. Vivian had spent 3 weeks telling this city I was unstable, that I had come back from overseas unhinged. Assaulted an elderly woman, taken a child in the night. She had built a portrait of a hysterical soldier. And the most useful thing I could do was walk in and be its opposite. So I did not scan the room for my husband. I did not look at Chloe. Near the bar, in a dress that did not belong to her life, I took a glass of water from a passing tray and let people watch me be calm. Then I went to work. Vivian was holding court near the west windows with 3 men I recognized from the client files, a developer, a hospital board chair, a man who had put $19 million with my husband's firm because they golfed together. She saw me and her jaw locked, and one of the men the developer turned and did the polite thing. "Major Reyes, we've heard there's been some, turbulence." "There has," I said. "Though I'd call it a misunderstanding about definitions." I set my glass down. Marcus misunderstood which client accounts he was allowed to move. An offshore holding company in the Caymans took in $2.5 million last month. It isn't in his name. It's registered to a junior broker at his firm named Chloe. Nobody gasped. That is not what happens with money. What happened was that 3 men went completely still, and then the hospital board chair reached into his jacket for his phone. "I'd audit your escrow positions before Monday," I said. "The commission has already been in contact with the custodial banks. I'd rather you heard it from a person than a subpoena." 60 seconds. The developer walked away mid-sentence with his phone at his ear. The other 2 followed him toward the lobby, and Vivian stood alone under a chandelier she had paid for, in front of a room that had just watched her empire become a liability. Her fingernails closed around my forearm, hard enough to bruise. "You come with me," she said. "Right now." She pulled me down a corridor into a coat room, shut the door, and the polished woman disappeared entirely. I want to be honest about what I did next, because it was deliberate. I did not defend myself. I did not shout. I stood in parade rest with my hands behind my back, and I gave her the one thing that a woman like that cannot survive: contempt. Delivered quietly. "Marcus has been sterile since he was 20, I said. "You've known 16 years. You couldn't stand a stranger's DNA inheriting your father-in-law's money. So you bought a doctor." Her chest was heaving, and she did what people never once told no eventually do when the world stops obeying them. She corrected me. "We had to use Julian's sample." Her voice came out ragged and grand at once, almost crying with the injustice of being misunderstood. "My oldest son was brilliant. He was perfect, and his line deserved to continue. Do you understand what you were? You were an incubator. That is all you ever were an incubator for, the Hale bloodline. And you should be on your knees thanking me that the child in your arms is worth something. The courtroom was very quiet. I raised my left hand and tapped my index finger twice against the ribbons on my chest, where a recorder had been running since the valet took my keys. "Thank you for that," I said. "It's lawful here, and it's admissible." And here is the part I have never been able to explain properly to anyone. I had imagined that moment for weeks. I thought it would taste like something. There was nothing. I stood in a room full of other people's coats, holding the confession that would end her, and what I felt was not triumph. It was a kind of grief so wide I could not see the edges of it, because I was looking at a woman who had just called her own granddaughter a piece of equipment and who genuinely, sincerely believed she was the injured party. I thought about Julian in a silver frame, about Nadia, the savings account with feelings, about Marcus at 20 in a clinic in another state, learning something about his body and understanding immediately that he could never tell his mother. I did not forgive him. I never have. But standing there, I finally understood that nobody grew up loved in that house, and that is not an excuse. It is just the saddest true thing I know. 3 weeks later, we walked into family court. Marcus came in wearing a gray suit and a rehearsed exhaustion, still holding a $300 piece of paper, still certain it was the strongest card at the table. His attorney opened by entering the forged report as Exhibit A. He did it well. He walked the judge through a portrait assembled with real care. A woman who chose deployments over her marriage, came home unable to reintegrate, put hands on a 62-year-old woman, and removed a child in the night. He asked for full custody, the house, and a support order against my pay. Then Marcus took the stand and cried on cue. He had loved that little girl as his own. He said he could not raise a child born from his wife's betrayal. The judge 60s. No visible patience for theater asked my counsel how we responded to Exhibit A. My attorney stood, buttoned his jacket, and said we did not dispute it. Marcus's smirk arrived and lasted about 4 seconds. "We agree, Mr. Hale is not the biological father," my attorney said. "We dispute the method of conception. The petitioner calls Dr. Raymond Kessler, medical director of Meridian Fertility Center." Kessler had been under federal subpoena for 9 days. He came down the aisle sweating through a very good suit and took the oath like a man who had already run the numbers on his own life. He did not last 3 questions. He testified that Vivian Hale had come to his office the morning of my retrieval with $150,000 in cash, and told him her son was azoospermic. That a genuine analysis would have shown a count of 0. So he authored a false one, altered the laboratory log, and handled the material himself rather than let a staff embryologist perform the standard witness verification, and that the sample came from a cryopreserved specimen banked years earlier by Julian Hale, deceased. He said the last part to the floor. Vivian came out of her seat shouting that he was a liar, that I had paid him. The judge threatened removal. 2 deputies moved toward the gallery. She sat down, and that was the last moment she was ever in control of anything. My attorney turned back to the bench. To corroborate, we submit a recording lawfully made by my client, a participant, in a one-party consent state. The clerk connected the drive. My voice came first quiet, level, asking about the clinic, then Vivian's, filling every corner of that courtroom. My oldest son was brilliant. He was perfect, and his line deserved to continue. You were an incubator. That is all you ever were. The audio cut. Nobody moved. I have sat in briefings after bad nights and never heard a silence like it. We were not finished. Andre took the stand, stated his credentials, then did something I will never stop being grateful for. He disclosed his own 2 signatures before opposing counsel could find them, and explained he had reported them himself. It cost him 3 uncomfortable minutes and made every word after unbreakable. He walked the court through $4 million in margin debt, client positions liquidated to cover it, the Cayman entity in Chloe's name, the bloodline provision in Harold Hale's trust, and the distribution date 14 months out, the reason a man who publicly denied a child would sue for custody of her. Then he held up a receipt in an evidence sleeve. $300, corporate card, coded as marketing materials, paid to a print shop 40 miles outside the city. The owner had confirmed the job alter a medical template, insert supplied figures. Exhibit A had come from a strip mall. Marcus's attorney sat down and moved his chair away from his client. Then we played the last file. The living room, 2:11 in the morning. Chloe near the fireplace asking whether the gas leak would look like an accident when I got back from the base. And Marcus, the man who held my coat in a parking garage while I cried, taking her shoulders and saying he would loosen the valve behind the stove the next afternoon. That the policy paid $3 million. That they would be gone by Tuesday. I had heard it a dozen times. It was different in a room with my daughter's name on the docket. The judge's face did not change, which was worse, and Marcus broke. He stood at the defense table, turned, and pointed at his own mother in the gallery. "She did it," he said. "All of it. I didn't know about the clinic. She did it behind my back. She's insane, ask anyone." I watched Vivian Hale look at her son. Everything she had done to preserve him. She bribed a doctor, defrauded her daughter, put a dead man's genes into my body so his name would carry, and he sold her in 11 seconds to buy a lesser sentence. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Something behind her eyes simply stopped. The judge did not declare a crime scene. She had no power to, and did not need it. She suspended the proceeding, referred the record to the prosecutor's office on an emergency basis, and ordered no one to leave the building. She had to arrange nothing else. Federal agents had been in the corridor since 8:40, because a whistleblower file had sat with the commission for 6 weeks. I stood, straightened, and set it to the room. They treated us as things to be thrown away. They forgot that the people you throw away are the ones who keep every receipt and every wound. They took Marcus out through the side doors. But the story does not end with a sentence. It ends with what I chose to do afterward. The sentences came down 11 months later. Marcus took 22 years. Vivian took 9, and will almost certainly die inside. Chloe cooperated and got 4. Kessler surrendered his license and got 6. The estate was liquidated. Defrauded clients were made whole first, as they should be. And what remained came to me through a civil judgment. People always want to hear what I did with it, and they are always a little disappointed. I did not buy a car anyone would look at twice. I put the bulk into an irrevocable trust for Sophia, structured so no one, including me, can touch the principal before she is 25. Then I bought a small house at the end of a road with pines on 3 sides, 40 minutes from my mother, with a kitchen that gets light in the morning. It is not a fortress. I thought it would be. For 6 months, I checked the locks twice a night, and then one evening I noticed I had stopped. That is what recovery looks like. Nobody films it. Andre resigned and opened his own practice. He had been the accountant of record on the largest bloodline trust fraud the state ever prosecuted, and had disclosed his own exposure before anyone asked which, in that profession, is worth more than any credential. Regulators started calling, then general counsels, then a bank. He has 11 employees now and a corner office with his name on the glass. The first time I visited, he stood at the window a long moment and said nothing at all. Nadia is legally a Whitfield now. She testified against her mother. She and Andre adopted a little boy last spring, a child the trust would have excluded by name, which is the funniest and best thing I know. We do holidays together, all of us, one table, and nobody sits at the end of it. 6 years I spent trying to be led into a family. I was already standing in one. Made of the other people they threw away, the letter came 14 months after sentencing. Cheap envelope, prison stamp, handwriting I did not recognize because the arrogance had gone out of the strokes. He wrote 3 paragraphs about repentance. Then he asked to see Sophia. I drove out there. Not to punish him, I had nothing left to take. I went because a threat left unanswered keeps growing in the dark, and I wanted it closed. He came into the booth thin and gray and much older, and picked up the phone with both hands. He said he still loved me, that he needed to leave her some legacy that was not this. You don't love her, I said. You loved what she unlocked. You planned to blow up a house with a 1-year-old inside it. He put his forehead against the glass and cried. And I felt no satisfaction, only the way you feel at a funeral for someone you stopped knowing years before they died. Then I told him the truth, which was not the cruelty he expected. She's safe. She's loved. Your name is off her records, and you will not see her while she is a child. That part is mine to decide. And then I said the thing I had not planned. But one day, she is going to ask where she came from, and I don't know yet what I owe her. I erased you from her paperwork. Did I have the right to erase half the truth of her own beginning? I've thought about it every week for a year. I still don't have an answer. Maybe it isn't mine to have. Maybe it's hers. When she's old enough to choose, he had nothing to say to that. Neither did I. I hung up the phone and did not look back on my way out. The parking lot was full of late afternoon light. Sophia was in her car seat, 2 years old now, holding a stuffed rabbit with one ear chewed flat. She saw my face in the rearview mirror and laughed that outrageous, whole-body laugh toddlers have. At nothing. At everything. I sat there a second before starting the engine. Here is what I know now, and it is the only advice I have. The greatest strength is not never falling apart. I fell apart on a hotel floor at midnight with formula powder on the carpet. And I would again. The strength is refusing to let what was done to you become what defines you. They tried to turn me to ash. All they did was light the fire that showed me who I actually was. I put the car in drive and pulled out into the sun. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear from you. If you were me when Sophia is old enough, would you tell her everything about where she came from or let the past sleep? There is no correct answer, and I mean that. Write yours in the comments. I read them. And tell me where in the world you're listening from. I love knowing. If Elena's story reached you, hit like and subscribe, and stay with me because I'll keep telling the stories of people everyone assumed were finished, who decided to stand back up.